Hello, I'm Denton Davidson, senior editor for Gold Derby. Oscar winner Dustin Lance Black is the creator, writer, and sometimes director of Under the Banner of Heaven from FX, streaming on Hulu. It's about a devout detective whose faith is tested as he investigates a brutal murder seemingly connected to an esteemed Utah family. Lance, tell us about how you first became connected to this. It's based on a book, and what's your personal connection to everything, and why did you decide to adapt it?
Yeah, I mean, I was born into a Mormon home and raised in a devout Mormon home. So it started well before the property, which came out around 20 years ago. As a kid, really, I started wondering why my mother was treated so differently in this faith that I will be frank, I really cared for. It felt like home. It's all I knew. And those questions about why my mother was treated differently, why the church did not intervene when violence entered our home, why they seemed to place the blame at her feet. Those questions ate away at me because I wasn't allowed to ask them. And that in Mormonism, you were supposed to doubt your doubts, put those questions on a shelf. And I was obedient. I did that. I would leave the church with my mom when I was a teenager, and I tried to just put it out of mind. And then when Under the Banner of Heaven came out about almost 20 years ago now, I, of course, started hearing about it from my family, some who were angry about it, some who said, you need to read this. And I did. And it answered a lot of those questions. It answered questions I didn't know to ask. It was like a lightning strike for me, opening my eyes to this world that I was born into, and that really formed me. So, it took a very long time before I was at a place in my career where I could get a John Krakauer to say yes, to trusting me with that property. And then it would take a lot of failing over many years to turn it into a feature film. That's what it began as. And it was only a few years ago when the limited series became this, this form that would hold a drama like this and that people would tune into, that I said, okay, I couldn't do it as a feature. There was not room to tell the story in a way that honored the book, that went deep enough to help people understand what this faith was, and the connection between its history and this crime. And so I went for it. I think it went from something that was deeply personal to something that felt necessary in the past many years. For those who haven't tuned in or don't know about it, it is about a family that hits hard times, a true story, in the Utah Valley. And they decide that they want to try to turn the clock back, if that sounds familiar, to go back to the good old days. And they start following fundamentalist, originalist interpretation of legal documents, including the US Constitution. That sounds familiar. And then take it even further and decide they're going to follow the Bible and the Book of Mormon literally. And so now I'm sitting on a property that's not just deeply personal, but I felt like is an absolute cautionary tale of our times, in a world that has hit hard times, where people are struggling, people's lives do feel smaller. There are many people who are turning back to fundamentalist documents in hopes that it'll feel like a foundation. And this story, and my fervent belief is that is not a foundation, that is a fallacy. The past is gone, and those rules were written by men almost exclusively who did not know what we know now. Even if they did mean well, and I'm not sure they all did. This following those dusty ancient documents is a road to ruin, and in the case of this true story, it led to bloodshed. So, I hope people see it, and if they see family members or neighbors who are going down that path, I hope they say, hey, that's not the way to go. That's not the way to get things back to better again.
Yeah, there's such a relevance to it. And I mean, it could be said for religion or just, following what people are saying in general. What's fascinating to me is that it's a true crime story, and there's a lot of those, but we don't often get a viewpoint from a detective that's so centered in religion, especially one that's a Mormon.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what that was like to bring to the screen. And, you know, were you concerned about being criticized? Were you just prepared to be criticized, or what was
Oh,
that
yeah.
like?
I mean, listen, there are three story skeins in the show. Two of them are based on true stories, whether that's the history of the church or the crime itself. The investigation is a dramatization. It's a fictionalization. There was no Jebediah Pyrie or Bill Tava
Mhm.
investigating this case. They're created in order to help the audience step into this story in an investigative, true crime fashion. But what's particular to this show is faith. And what happens when you question faith deeply. And what's really unique about Mormonism in the Salt Lake Valley is that you are not supposed to ask questions about the past. You're not supposed to probe too deeply, as I said before. And so what happens when an investigator has to do that in order to serve, in order to try and find justice for those who are slain? Well, this is what happens. If you probe too deeply, if you ask these difficult questions, it might start to crack your faith. And I hadn't seen that story, but I'd experienced that story, and I'd shared, that experience with a lot of people, and I felt like that was my way in. Thankfully, it helps defy some of the investigative tropes. I was able to have him have a good family life and a good home life, which doesn't often happen to an investigator. But if you're asking challenging questions in the Utah Valley in this time, it's going to threaten that family. It's going to threaten your place in that community. So that's another, now you sort of can see where my feet are standing. If I throw the door open and let the light shine in on the Mormon faith, my childhood faith, the Mormon church is not going to be pleased with that.
Right.
That's not what we're supposed to do. And, the Mormon church is deeply uncomfortable with anybody on the outside discussing the faith, frankly, anyone on the inside discussing the faith publicly. But I feel like it's time we have to do that. I mean, this is an American-born faith that is among the most misogynist faiths on the planet Earth today. And I'm sorry to say that because I have family I love who are still in the faith. But it's time for them to take a close look at that and to ask why they are still to this day encouraging families and children to pray to a misogynist God who would treat women the way women are treated in certainly the fundamentalist Mormon faith, but also in the mainstream Mormon faith. Women are not treated equally or as equally capable. So they're not going to like it, and there is pushback, and there will be criticism, but I'm here for it. Bring it. And if people want to know what's true and right, I encourage them to do their research. It will be eye-opening.
And I mean, you get Andrew Garfield to star. I mean, he's had an incredible year, Oscar nominated for Tick, Tick, Boom. He has so much range as an actor. What was that like for you to get that, lead and, be able to go from there? So probably breathe a sigh of relief when someone like that comes on board.
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is I needed someone of his caliber to get a green light. Like people aren't jumping up and down to green light these sorts of shows, and that challenge the status quo in this way. And he was the first person that came to mind, mainly because I'd met him a couple times, but I paid attention to the choices he was making and some of the things he had said about faith and doubt. And I didn't know where he stood in terms of his own faith, but at least I knew he was thoughtful about these things, and that's what I wanted, was someone who would come and be thoughtful about it, who'd want to do his own homework, and so I mean, I was just really lucky that he had the time and the space to consider it, and that he responded to it, and that in our very first meeting, my hopes were confirmed that he would dig deeper, he would put pressure on it. And that's what you want in a cast, isn't just people to help your imagination come to life, but for me, in my experience, it's been, cast actors who are smart and thoughtful and creative, and they put pressure on the words, and it turns the words into steel, hopefully. and that's what he did, and he was up for that. So was I. So, you know, this whole cast. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
I'm the luckiest guy in the world. Let's be real.
Andrew and the whole cast were fantastic. Such a thought-provoking story. And Lance, congratulations on Under the Banner of Heaven for FX. It's streaming on Hulu. The best of luck to you and the entire cast and crew at this year's Emmys. And, you know, thank you for spending some time with Gold Derby today.
Thanks, Denton, very much.